Hi, this is Privateer Station, and today we bring you day 584 of Russian invasion into Ukraine. As always, with former advisor to the office of the President of Ukraine, Lieutenant Colonel Alexey Arestovych, and his two new pals in this format, Nikolai Feldman and Yuri Romanenko. Our usual thanks go to our supporters. Thank you, Bill. Super thanks, Rock. And of course, Daniel Smith, Dave Hopper, and Jay Murr. You guys are fantastic. Thanks for remaining our members after all these months. And with this, let's deep dive into day 584, where the guys discuss options for Ukraine to win the arms race with Putin's Russia. Enjoy. Hello, everybody. This is Project Alpha. We're starting our live stream. War Diary with Alexey Arestovych. Please do not forget to click like and subscribe and support our work here. Good evening, Alexey. Yuri Romanenko cannot make it today. He might be able to join us a bit later. We gave him all the opportunities, but chances are he's going to miss this one. He is on the road today. So, Alexey, let's start with you. With that news, the main one is that Alliance of Defense Production Companies in Ukraine is going to work internationally with our allies. Zelensky announced an international forum is underway today where 252 defense companies from 30 countries of the world partake. Foreign Affairs of Ukraine confirmed that over 30 companies from 19 countries have already joined the alliance, and Ukraine will concentrate on creating production capabilities for these companies. So it looks like Ukraine is becoming a serious platform for weapons production. Is that the right path? Yes, of course. But what day of war is today? I think it's 584th, right? So my question, and apologies for asking it, what was happening the previous 500 and something days? Well, at least better late than never. If you remember, Stoltenberg and two defense ministers of France and Britain have visited Ukraine before that forum and signed a bunch of documents. So it does look in the framework of international politics that our allies understand that Putin decided to go for the war of attrition, and at least to the elections in the United States, which is more than a year right now. And they're going into the winter campaign, of course. They'll try to hit our energy infrastructure and more targets. They understood that our allies understand that there will not be a quick change in this war, and it's time for them to change the global strategy. Every global strategy is based on your resources availability, and during the war times, it's arms, munitions, and everything that is capable to continue and ensure supply of those. So now our allies with Ukraine are working on creating these capabilities. I was looking at this war and I was gauging that every half a year there is a certain qualitative jump in this war. So probably by February, March, we'll have another jump, and that's how our capability grows. So we'll see where it goes. And we'll see how Russian military-industrial complex can compare to Ukrainian industrial complex. That's on one hand. On the other hand, it's very important to localize the means that we're being given by our allies to fight with. In Ukraine, we've been dumping down the drain our military capabilities since 1991, since the fall of USSR. According to The Economist, our industrial production decreased twice since 1991. We met 1991 on a much higher level because of big projects that USSR had at that time. And then we started dropping it to our real level, which is sustainable for our country. And probably right now we got to the bottom, and we probably will start pushing back up from it because our engineer school is in deep crisis. We have some old people, representatives of that school, who are now in late 60s, early 70s, so we have maybe 5 years to transfer some of that knowledge to our new specialists. And of course, there will be new information, new school of engineering thought coming from allies as well. So between that, we should be able to establish our new platform for engineering and production. But it is a complex thing. It is a much wider complex that will probably touch upon all the other industries related to that. Different other branches of economy will also have to be uplifted and modernized in relation to this military complex. And one of the ways is to create certain clusters in our country and injecting new system of relations into these clusters of production. First of all, because we will have heavy presence of our allies in the system, and they will start to bring more health to initially their own environment, and then they'll start bring more healthy relations to the other industries as well. History had examples like that, so especially if we will not stay on the level of declarations, but we'll start to actually work on these matters. And of course, we are smiling a bit, and regardless of our irony, this is a very good motion. So you said there are some historic examples we can look at. Which ones do you mean? Israel. Israel, yes. Their military-industrial complex basically were the main engine for their economy for a long time, and it uplifted the politics and other relations in the society. But Israel didn't have corruption the way we did, right? Or am I wrong? Well, corruption exists everywhere, but Israel didn't have time for that corruption to grow too much, because the night they announced independence, they were attacked by 5 countries. So they had no illusions that they need to work. They need to really work on everything. They do not have time for corruption. Corruption initially was the same as in Ukraine. It just didn't have time to grow. And they had a lot of choices between choosing more socialist or more capitalist path. And they were choosing also over the language battles between their population groups, where to go, to the left populism or right conservatism. So they picked a certain middle path and a general understanding that you can be left, right, atheist, liberal, but still die altogether if you don't have enough security, enough military production in your country. That brought a sobering thought that it's better to hold hands and work together than to die alone. So it's a very similar story to what is happening in Ukraine. If we take the time frame, for example, we can take Bayraktar that was being grown in Ukraine during the last year, I believe. And today, the owner of Bayraktar was talking that the investments have reached about $100 million already in the production into Ukraine, on Ukraine territory, and they expect pre-production capabilities to take a few more months. But in reality, you look at that and you think that real localized production is going to take you about 2.5 years to establish. Well, it depends how you do it. And one can take a look at what problems are objective, what problems are subjective. We remember how Bayraktar plant started when somebody said they'll have to pay 10 million for electric energy, which was madness because this is our allies coming us to help build UAVs. They should be getting electric energy pretty much for free for their initiative. So we need to find more effective ways around our bureaucracy, despite the presence of a certain level of corruption and traditional speed with which we move. If we manage to solve that, that'll be a very successful motion in the right direction, if we manage to shrink that time. But localization is a rather complex activity. Modern economic systems, modern weapons systems production is a very science-intensive manufacturing, and 2 years, yeah, it's relatively basic time frame for setup. But still, even if we manage to take our territories back, kick Russia out, and be good in about a year, the life doesn't stop at this. We need to continue manufacturing our capabilities and increasing them so that Russia would not be able to repeat that offensive. I said about when this war started in February of last year that we went to sleep in old Ukraine and woke up in Israel. So let's talk about this news that also popped today, that joining of Ukraine to European Union in 2030 is a real objective goal. New ambassador to Ukraine has said that this is objective, realistic goal that Ukraine is going to strive for, and it looks like the ambassador was basically setting a new framework for realism of Ukraine joining European organizations. So, in your view, do you think it's realistic, or is it more like a dangling carrot in front of the donkey so we could keep walking in a certain path and wouldn't know if it will come or not? I think it means that a certain collective viewpoint of some experts in the West had prevailed, who managed to explain that this war and everything related to it will take that long. And their think tanks, their experts, and politicians decided to rely on that data. And that's the framework they're communicating to us now. But how often do Western experts make mistakes on this war? We have witnessed that 500 times already, right? Starting with the very beginning, when everybody were saying that Ukrainian army will not be able to hold longer than a couple days. So they can be saying whatever they think is real for them. We need to stop being children who faint when we hear something that we don't like. We are strong. We are surviving one of the harshest wars in history of Europe right now, but we still faint when we hear the news that we don't like. When we hear that the war may continue or military activities can continue till 2035, or that European Union process of joining will take another 7 years. So trust me, dear viewers, in the next couple of years, there'll be so many changes in Europe, in the world, with Ukraine, that any planning right now, 7 years forward, is very for the birds. You cannot reliably plan for that distance. You can plan scenarios, but if you communicate too early of scenarios of these versions when they're just so much in flux, you can only support Putin with his statements. A real planning in this case, with a lot of volatility, you can talk about scenarios, you can talk about different options, how they unfold, and what will happen if they do. I'm not sure what exactly did she say, but maybe they have taken apart her statements. But if indeed that's what was said, that's an example of not exactly an effective communication. It actually happened when she was meeting with the representatives of anti-corruption organs here in Ukraine. So probably it was a confirmation of the framework that American partners sent to us, saying that during certain months there got to be some fundamental changes in anti-corruption fight in Ukraine, and we understand that this is a top priority. Yeah, it is very strict. That is a specific element that is very strict for the West. They definitely will not abandon these requests, and Ukraine needs to systemically fight, and fight successfully, any elements of their economic corruption. There is another piece of news that we can address today, that Russia is exploiting today. Officially, a year ago, Russia accepted Kherson region, back then initially with the city of Kherson, Zaporozhye region without Zaporozhye, and other territories not in their full capacity. And Medvedev in Russia made statement again that Russian land will grow with new Russian lands. And I think that this is a good point for us to transfer to the map and take a look and analyze where else Russia may have some opportunity to grow with some new lands. I don't think they have any capability to add new territories. They are at a limit. Without getting 300, 400,000 troops from somewhere, relatively trained and modernized, they would not be able to change situation on any part of the front, be it external or internal. I think they'd be lucky if they managed to repel our attacks in the south or in the east. So here's a good example. They tried to exchange our attacks in the south for their success in the north. What did it end with? Now they have to withdraw troops from the north and bring them to the south to try to stop the motion of our troops. As for the map, the general layout did not change much. There is more intensification where you can see on Rabotina and Verbovoye protrusion. They have withdrawn one of the divisions, the 86th Division, to refit it, and they hastily plugged it with more new troops. The previous personnel was grinded down to critical level where they had to withdraw in about 2 weeks. So you can imagine the quality of troops that will be thrown to replace the ones that were destroyed. So now they're trying to bring more strategic reserve, that second army, which is not really fully formed, which is just a piece of what should be an army. It was planned to be more or less in the right shape by December, so you can imagine that it is half-baked, not really ready for fight group. So their problem now is that they're trying to stop us here near Rabotina, but in essence, they're weakening other parts of the front, so we might use this opportunity there. Of course, there is a lot of heavy fighting near Avdiivka, Kremenaya, and Svatova, but the line holds and not much changes. And with this, Russia announced another autumn draft, the usual seasonal draft. And oh yeah, of course, they will be doing that. And I should need to remind that when we destroyed the backup command outpost in Crimea for the Black Sea Fleet, there were, I think, about 10 mobilized recruits who were killed there as a result of this attack. And in the meantime, right, the Russian Ministry of Defense is saying that the recruits will not be fighting on the front. They'll be trained first. How can they explain that? Well, it's rather simple. They are, even if they're not going to the front, to the line zero, they could be in the group that provides logistics, brings ammo, or does some security work. If we attack legitimate military target, they'll die. And Russians, they also create a certain system of pressure on their fresh draftees that they want them to sign contract. They're basically saying you will serve that time without any pay, or the moment you sign contract, you actually at least will get some money. Nothing else changes. Because the moment you stop stop with your 2-year service and you'll be supposedly sent back home after your duty is completed, you will be immediately drafted back. And it's much easier for you to have a contract, and then at least, again, you will be able to earn some. So at this point, the newly made soldier needs to take political side and say certain set of arguments in order to repel these psychological attacks on him to sign the contract and be thrown on the front line, which is a hefty ask for many of them. So do you think this autumn draft will also coincide with mobilization that they're trying to do and will give them enough numbers? No, it is an opposite here. They're trying to disconnect these two processes. Their mobilization has never stopped, right? It's probably more the matter of, do you call for 200,000 one time, or are you calling 20,000 during 10 months, each month? So, and they're calling for the contract. They're actually offering some pay for the people. And quite a few people agree in Russia to do that because for them it's an obvious, seems like a shortcut to jump from one social layer to another with the payout. So what about European news? Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Hungary is trying to make Ukraine and European allies to deblock one of their banks. And the story there is that our anti-corruption system moved OTP Bank to the list of corrupt organizations supporting war, because the bank still works on the territory of Russia, provides credit systems for the so-called military men of so-called republics of Donetsk and Lugansk, so continues to work with those territories. And now Hungary comes out and says that please remove that bank from the list of sponsors of terrorism, and then we'll unfreeze 500 millions of Ukraine dedicated money that European Union set aside. Yeah, so let's say it's not European Union who's asking to unfreeze this bank, it's Hungary and Orban's government who's asking. So there's also, I think, 5 ships that belong to Greece that we lifted sanctions from. And also in Slovakia, we do have some issues with who is running for the next presidential elections, and we gave them a huge present to that fella in Slovakia, who got a couple percent when we quarreled on the topic of grain. So he's capitalizing on that. Famous meme of this war: nothing is so simple, nothing is so straightforward, even in the EU and NATO, when they have certain collectively formulated interests, but certain countries try to go against that. On the other hand, the punishment for Putin for his winter campaign is a 12th package of sanctions and under discussions. So for me, what's important is, in that difficult situation, we are trying to find ways to work with them. Because back a few months ago, neither Hungary nor us even wanted to work with each other. Their political majority did not want to hear about Ukraine, and we did not want to work with Hungary because of their position. So regardless, it's good that we're sobering up and starting to work. We've been stubborn for a while, since our Poroshenko times, after the law about national minorities, which upset some of the Hungarian minorities in our country. And I think finally we have some examples of compromise, of discussions. And even though it's a conversation about the cost of doing it, what's more important, 500 millions of aid, or that OTB bank that gives credits to DNR and LNR military, personal credits for their military, for mortgage and others. So this is war, and I think war trumps any other issue. So it's a realistic matter, asking us, what do we want? Do we need 500 million from the EU to support our military, or do we want to continue sanctions against this specific bank? But it's a situation when there is too much flexibility with enough hardness. It's bad. When everything is too hard without flexibility, it's bad too. So we need to find that middle way. Do you think this is a weird position that EU has in regards to that bank? Because sanctions are supposedly implying that Russia would be disconnected from financial operations with Europe, and that bank still works there. Well, no. So Russians are not disconnected from all the financial systems, but the SWIFT system is turned off for them. So it's an interesting question how that bank even functions there, technically. But I think EU actually has certain levers to address Hungary. Remember, they used some of them about a year ago to force Hungary to agree to certain financial help. But this is not something that you can do once and for all. You need to work systemically, and the European Union doesn't like these one-time statements and sharp fights over certain individual situations. They prefer to work systemically. So we'll see what happens in the 12th package of sanctions. That bank actually can perhaps be there as that package, and not even from Ukraine, but from European Union work on it. All right. So next in focus is Germany. There, the head of the Bundestag committee, Marie-Agnes Strack-Zimmermann, called upon the government of Germany to immediately supply Taurus missiles to Ukraine, and she says that Ukraine has all the rights to attack military targets on the territory of Russian Federation. International law also, she says, allows Ukraine to attack military targets on the territory of the aggressor, regardless of where the weapons were manufactured and who supplied that. I think this is a rather large-scale change coming from Germany, and I think it's a big change in their political opinion, and it's not too far from that to bridge that point of view to the next step, which basically tells that Ukraine has a right to venture into Russian territory during this war. Well, yeah, international right doesn't limit participants of war from entering each other's territories. In some angle, one can say you cannot even win the war without entering the enemy's territory. So the West, finally drifting from their irrational fears when they were explaining at the beginning of war why Russian territory should not be attacked, at all costs, now they're moving to a more rational field. They understand that Putin is ignoring their appeals about winter campaign and understand that he doesn't want to work with them, so they're figuring ways to make him pay for his stubbornness. So that piece of a price will probably be some of the weapons that Ukraine will be able to use on targets in Russia. And use of different weapons is also including a lot of intel information, especially long-range weapons. So, of course, there will be missiles flying at Russian targets. If they thought that they'll be attacking our energy system without any blowback, they were very wrong. They're already talking about difficulties with electric supply in a few border regions, and we're not even fully in autumn yet, right? And Taurus is a very serious missile. It hits very well-defended targets, so basically it's a bunker buster. It can poke up really well-defended targets. And this is very good for us, especially for very well-fortified electric systems in Russia that will become a very interesting target. All right. A reminder here for those who are with us today, do not forget to click the like button. That helps to bring our light to those who've never seen our streams otherwise. So if you can, please do your civic duty and click the like button. That would be appreciated. Mayor of the Romanian city, Glatz, Iona Puceanu, is saying that the air attack raids, warnings, and sirens actually causes certain setbacks with the mental health of the Romanian citizens to keep hearing these sirens every time when Russia is attacking targets in Ukraine. So his point of view is that if Russia is doing something in Ukraine, Romania should not be setting up any sirens in the air, and if there are any issues, their air defense systems should just work on the Russian targets without disturbing their citizens. How would you answer that? That's an interesting, peculiar piece of news. Our answer is very simple here, Nikolai. If somebody dies from even a piece of Russian Shahed or a missile that Romanian Air Force or air defense systems shoot down, who will be guilty? And the first question will be, who failed to warn people? Modern-day politicians very often like to jump into emotions and talk about problems from their point of view, but the quality of politician is always defined by his capability to understand the complexity of situation. Because imagine there is a Russian missile flying, going into the airspace of Romania. They declared no-fly zone, so their defense system shoot down the Russian missile, and somebody dies from the remnants of it falling on their heads. And there was no siren at that moment. There was no warning for civilians. So the question would be, who would be responsible for that? So that dear mayor probably didn't think this through. All right, then I'll follow here with the question, what do we do with the mental health of Ukrainian citizens? And how do you think we fare in relation to all these sirens and warnings that we have daily? So the question is, how much alarms raise the level of alarm in the society? Well, I think, of course, war is a big issue, but the state of economy, the way we conduct our mobilization efforts, and perhaps the fact that we are still somewhat locked inside Ukraine, I think these things press more on our moral situation, more moral conditions in Ukraine. Because when you limit rights and freedoms of people without the proper perspective, economically and politically, this is not the best proposition to society. Yet it has been proposed and it works, and it still accumulates people's resentment because of different injustices. And you can see what bothers them. Because most of them, it's not even the actions of enemy shellings and enemy military that concern them. The most concerning for our people is mistrust to your own. When you see that you cannot trust that your government can take, your bureaucrats cannot be trusted to make the right decision. Military shellings, people get used to them, as sad as it is. All right, so about ours and not ours. Budanov, the head of military intel, had gave an interview recently that in Russia, 2 weeks before this war started, we're not even sure if Ukraine is going to welcome them. But then this point of view was changed by the agents network that they had here in Ukraine that was basically stealing Russian money and reporting them whatever they wanted to hear, and that's why they entered. So I have a question. So inside Ukraine, in this year and a half, do we understand what that Russian-funded agent network consists of, besides Medvedchuk, of course, who is well known, and Zivkovich, who's living in Russia somewhere now? I'll say it like this, Nikolai. We've been so effingly not ready for this war that Russians were just tempted with the easiness of that operation, or implied easiness. They thought it is so going to be a walk in the park that they went for a crazy and mad operation of capturing Kiev, when they had a much better option. They could just cut off our troops in the east by attacking in a pincer motion behind them, not going for Kiev, just cut off the troops that we have on the fortified lines in the east, cause the crisis and collapse of government with that, and then do whatever they want with Ukraine. But they went for something unedible like Kiev. And I think it was a combination of our horrible preparedness for this war and their horrible intel and ill preparedness for that war. That reminds me the war of end of 19th century with Turkey, between Turkey and Russia, when people were calling that war was the war of one armed with one leg. Both sides were ill prepared. So it also, you brought my attention to, maybe it's a good time to talk about it, that our intel people, our counterintel people are working and they're capturing assets of Russian spy network daily. Pretty much daily there are successes, and they're getting people who are aiding Putin troops in one way or another. And it's not so easy to find them. Sometimes to put the real ones, it takes you 10 years to plant the real spy. The known spies are only the ones who were caught, right? The ones who were uncovered. So if it was so easy to catch them here, and they were wearing some special Russian uniform, that would have been so much easier for us. But proper spies are prepared by the country, they are funded, they're trained. Sometimes they're so well placed, and it may take them 20 years to naturalize. Because in the Soviet Union times, it took 10 to 12 years to plant a spy and to legalize them, or half legalize them there in the West. And it's rather fast, because before that, I think the framework was more 15, 20 years. So it's a very specific story. But I know how our counterintelligence works. They're not horses. They're not squirrels in the wheel. This is some mad marathon, but they're delivering tremendous results, and they're taking different size of spies here. We still catch the big ones too? Yep, we do. We do. Which industries? Are they inside military? They're actually everywhere, Nikolai. Not only military. And again, how do you gauge the size of the spy? He could be a military person in a small, relatively small level organization, but he gave data to Russians, which led them to destroy a huge warehouse with a lot of ammo from the West. Is he a small spy or is he a big spy? Is he so? How do we gauge how big you are? By the size of damage, or by the stars and your official title? We now have a few congressmen who are being accused of aiding Russia. And if that congressman is a member of defense committee, there'll be a lot of data that he or she can deliver to our foes. So, with all the huge respect to those people who actually do the active capture, who run, break into the buildings and capture people by force, those spies when they intercept them somewhere, or different other intel branches who crawl through the forest in mud and with the branch up their butt to aid our missile targeting systems. I asked them to not be upset, but the highest level of intel community is not those. The highest level that brings colossal and very often historic harm, those are people who don't even take a table knife in their hands. They don't crawl anywhere. They don't go fighting with guns. Their area of work is a societal event, a ball, a game of golf, a meeting of some fish industry. And these are the guys very often solving in a calm, quiet atmosphere and acquiring certain secrets that cannot compare by the size of effectivity with anything you can do with a gun on the front. And timely delivered information or disinformation is the highest level of intel work. Catching somebody and shooting somebody is, of course, important, but this is the lower level of pyramid. The pyramid would not stand without it. Everybody is important, but the hierarchy looks like that. So, service of Ukraine security is taking different ones. It's capturing the ones who are serving as targeting systems for Russian missiles, who are trying to leak data about the warehouses, but also they're trying to capture the ones who are meeting in the highest echelons of power. One more news from the United States. A speaker from the Chamber of Representatives, McCarthy, said that money for Ukraine need to be set aside from the discussion about government shutdown to avoid that shutdown for federal government. He says that if Congress had a clean project without Ukraine, it probably would even be passed. So, speaking of American shutdowns, I think recently they had once. I think Trump had some shutdown event during his presidency. So, what about now? We understand they have. It's a very difficult decision they're making now. But how do you think it will affect them? America will not die from shutdown. It's just one of the elements they used during the election campaign, and that campaign is going to be tough. So sides usually take very opposite positions, and during the election campaign, they always go in the direction of hardening these positions. So they're not softening, they're not negotiating with each other, they're really hardening it. McCarthy has picked that position, and he's going to push it every time he gets a chance, because that's ABC of politics. If you are talking about a certain economy sector, even if you're invited to talk about some carrots or agriculture, you say two words about carrots, and then you talk about the sector you wanted to talk about, or even start talking about that sector. Because he'll be hitting the target over and over again when they'll be voting for any other financial projects. We'll see in December when they'll be voting more money to aid Ukraine, not for military expenses, but for economic sustainability. I have a feeling that they won't discuss too much the military help. This part will be growing, and there'll be a consensus in American society. They will not be toying with our security. That part we probably can be safe about. But as for the economic aid, general economic aid to us as a country, that probably will be up for discussions. All right, so one more news. I think we have a little bit of time left. Coming from Russia, that may help our listeners to understand what Russia has to face with the return of those Wagner troops who had a chance to come back from the front, who came back from the front. So in Nizhny Novgorod region, one of the ex-Wagner troops, as a result of his quarrel with his sister, he poured gasoline on her and burned her alive. And that's Nizhny Novgorod media is reporting, referencing local officials. So the sister of this fellow dies from the trauma of this incident, and Grichko is his last name. He was jailed several times before. In March of last year, he was imprisoned for 11 years for murder, after which, because he quarreled with some friend of his, and he stabbed him at least 12 times with a knife. And I'm sorry for these gory details, but I think Russian viewers need to understand what they're facing now. And this is not the only one, Nikolai. There was another video this week when there was another Wagnerite who tried to suffocate some passerby and then attacked the girl who was shooting that on video. There were other news with more Wagner troops taking shovels and hitting their neighbors with it. One needs to understand, the moment you start the war and you bring death to your neighbor country, it will come back to you. You know, it's that old military story, the earth is round, but it has the shape of a suitcase, and you always meet in the corner. So when they took those criminals, hardened criminals who were serving decades in prison, they whitewashed them, legalized them, and some of them even came back alive. They injected that horrific element back into society. And for them, definitely for the inmates, that's a chance, because they can maybe survive. If they survive war, they can be whitewashed, they can get a second chance and actually be glorified somewhat by the Russian propaganda, in quotes, glory, of course, in this case. And of course, it will affect Russian society. But since when have Russian authorities thought about Russian people? So 100 veterans will kill 100 citizens. So what? With their losses from 600 to 1,000 troops per day on the front, it doesn't matter for them. This is not the government that will be worried about their civilians. Civilians in Russia will have to think about themselves, and that's why we are bringing these topics up and we remind them. So when you guys see another veteran of that so-called special military operation, think again if you want to be in the same place with them, especially if there is alcohol drinks involved or an opportunity to quarrel over something. So yeah, run if you see one. Thank you for that stream, Alexey. I think we're done with the news for today. We're awaiting for you on Monday, right? See everybody on Monday. Thank you and goodbye.